Well, the province may be adding to its collection of provincial parks. The province is looking for public opinion on creating a park along the Restigouche River, the Restigouche Wilderness Waterway Provincial Park. Roberta Clowater is Executive Director of the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, or CPAWS, New Brunswick chapter, and she is with me in the studio now. Good morning. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Terry.
Okay, let's start with your general reaction to this initiative.
Well, we're really excited that the government is proceeding with this idea that we've been working on for almost 20 years now. The idea behind it first came when Andre Arpin took us down the river about 20 years ago and said his vision was to see a wide protected area all along the river to help protect the tourism values and the nature. And so this is the realization of a vision that's been on all of our minds for a long time. We hope that it's going to be a significant realization of that vision and that the areas will actually get protected in a significant way.
Okay, thumbs up on the broad initiative. What are the specific issues you have or the specific concerns you have about turning that area into a park?
Well, we think it's important that they're calling it a buffer. They're calling it it's going to be a linear park along the Restigouche, the Upsaquitch, the Kedgwick, and the New Brunswick side of the Patapedia rivers. So it's a long, stretched out protected area is basically what it is. And we want it to be as wide as possible to take in as much of the forested land around the rivers as we think is needed to actually protect the rivers themselves. There's also a tourism value to protecting that wide a buffer because you're really going to be protecting all the view sheds, everything that people can see from the rivers, all the things that the tourists will experience. And it will also protect the tourists from the noise of the industrial operations that are happening on the Crown land all around the Restigouche.
So how wide do you want that buffer to be from the riverbank back?
Yeah. So we had originally recommended 500 meters on either side, which would have being about a kilometer wide all the way along. We thought that would be reasonable amount to be protective. And the proposal they have out here right now is for about 200 meters on either side. But they have said that in certain parts of the river, it will likely be wider to accommodate protecting special features, and possibly some of those view sheds that I just talked about.
You mentioned that you wanted that buffer to protect the rivers. Protect them from what?
Protect the river from industrial operations, from industrial activity, from development, from new road building, all of the different kinds of industrial activities that happen on the rest of Crown land all the time.
Okay, why is the width of the buffer an issue? So you've asked for that much. The province says we're willing to give you this much. Why the discrepancy?
The wider the buffer is, the more natural area will be there to help protect the river from runoff, from the possible erosion and sedimentation that comes from clearing of the land. So when land gets clear cut, then more water rushes across the flat, clear-cut surface because it's not hitting the trees anymore.
Sure.
And it just runs right into the streams that lead into the rivers. So it's more protective to have a wider buffer. Then government does their balancing act and they decide that it needs to be a little bit more narrow than we had anticipated. But we still think that that's a good start as long as as they're designing it, think about what are those areas that are beyond that 200 meters that need to be protected. Are there big wetlands? Are there important cold water streams that they could also protect? And we think it's important because there's so much steep slope in the Restigouche system that they start measuring that buffer from the top of the slope. So not from the
riverbank.
Not from the riverbank up a slope,
right,
but from the top of the slope and measure back if they're going to have a 200 meter. But we would recommend even larger than that. But if they were going to do that, that was how we would propose.
What are you anticipating hearing from the public during the public consultation process?
We because we've been doing so much work over a couple of decades up in that region, we know that there's a lot of support for protection of the river. It supports a lot of jobs that most people in New Brunswick don't even think about. People who work in salmon lodges, guides, outfitters, the cooks, the camp managers. There's a significant canoe ecotourism, several canoe ecotourism operations on the river, and all of those, the people that work in those sectors think it's important that they have a destination that's safe, that's protected from industrial activity, and that their customers can count on coming back year after year, having a beautiful wilderness experience on the Restigouche.
You know, the Algonquin Park experience in Ontario, just to draw a parallel, is that so you have this supposedly wilderness area in the province, but to generate more tourist traffic. But with more tourist traffic comes a degradation of the wilderness aspect. I mean, is that a concern in the Restigouche? I mean, if you turn it into an ecotourism destination, does the traffic, how do you control the traffic?
Well, that's going to be part of the discussions with the government about this potential park, is what kind of rules and limitations and controls will a park put in that region to ensure that it doesn't become overused. So the Allagash Wilderness Waterway in Maine, they actually have people have to register, especially if they are using a boat that has a motor that might disturb other visitors. There are ways to control the numbers of people that are using an area at a certain time, and so that should be part of the discussions and part of the rulemaking when they're discussing how to operate this park.
I have heard on social media that there is some concern that these good acts that are being undertaken by the government might be the beginning of an announcement that might not be so welcomed by the conservation groups and environmentalists in the province. In other words, that there might be something coming that isn't going to be as positive from your perspective. And I asked the minister about that in an interview a few days ago, and he didn't really spell anything out, but he acknowledged that there were more forest industry related announcements to come. What is your take on that? Are you waiting for the other shoe to drop here?
I think it's healthy for us to have a little bit of skepticism. I've been around long enough that I see that sometimes progress is one step forward and two steps back. And I feel that I'm getting sincerity from the ministers involved, because the tourism minister is also the one that's taking the lead on this park proposal. I'm getting real, sincere support. That it sounds to me like they really sincerely support these ideas.
So he's credible to you.
They seem like they really are on board, and they understand that there is an economic benefit to having more protected areas. That all tourism in New Brunswick is associated with nature in some way. Most people come here because they want to see wildlife and wilderness and coastal views and all kinds of beautiful things.
Sure.
But I do think that the New Brunswickers need to remain vigilant. So we're not going to be able to keep this progress moving forward if somebody besides me isn't saying that they support it happening. So we need people to come out to the public consultations. We need them to go to open houses. We need them to take that online survey. We need them to keep going with the letter writing to government saying, yes, we support this and we want more. And we want you to be more visionary with the approach that you're taking, and so that the government knows that there are supporters out there, so that when the opposition comes from individuals, from other sectors who are feeling threatened by the idea of protected areas, that they know they have the support of New Brunswick voters on this topic. That people, and we'll be there. CPAWS New Brunswick will be there if they want to come to our website, cpawsnb.org, and find out what they need to do. We're in there in the mix. We're watching. We're going to be watching this process like a hawk, and we'll let people know when they need to say something. And right now they need to say something, because if people think that more of the Restigouche needs to be protected, they need to say that. Because in these kinds of processes where governments talk a lot about trade-offs, it's easy for them to back off on something and say, oh, well, we didn't hear from enough people. Maybe there aren't as many people who care about this as we thought. So if you care about it, you need to speak out and keep speaking out. And, we'll do our job to keep people in the loop when those needs are there.
And how are you anticipating the forest industry reacting to this or responding to this?
So far, the forest industry isn't expressing as much concern about the Restigouche because it's more, as I said, it's a linear, stretched out protected area, mainly in stream buffers where they already have restrictions on how much they can harvest. So I'm not expecting as much pushback if some of those areas where we want them to get a little bit wider, start impacting on the wood supply too much, then I suspect there will be a little pushback. And I know that there probably want to be at the table when the other protected areas across the province are being discussed as well. So far, there hasn't been an awful lot of vocal opposition, but we know that they don't have to come out publicly and express their vocal opposition a lot. They have a lot of relationships with the provincial government, contractual relationships, agreements that have been made in the past, and they work hand in hand with the government on management plans for Crown land. So
there are ways of making their position known.
Yes.
I thank you for your time this morning. When do you think this will actually be a reality?
Well, it depends upon how the discussions go. We're encouraging the provincial government to have as many discussions with Indigenous peoples as possible. We'd love to see some sort of co-stewardship agreements with Indigenous peoples. If they could do some interim protection in the meanwhile, while we're all talking about this, then the protection part of it could become a reality soon, within the next year or year and a half, while the details are being worked out.
Okay. Thank you again.
Thanks.
Roberta Clowater is the Executive Director of the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society for New Brunswick. Any thoughts? Please get in touch. You can talk to me on Twitter at SEGUINCBC, or you can send an email to info@frederickton@cbc.ca. The province is planning a series of public open houses about the proposal, and I will put a link to the schedule on our Twitter page. 4 minutes before 8 o'clock.